She stood at the bottom of the basement stairs, one hand gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. In front of her, the dim light barely reached the far wall, but it was enough to see it. The shape. At first she thought it was a mannequin, left there from some forgotten project. But then it moved. Her breath caught in her throat. She pressed a hand over her mouth, fighting the urge to scream. "Oh my God," she whispered to herself, the words trembling out. He's been doing this for years. The man she had loved, the man she had defended at dinner tables and praised in public, was not the man she thought he was. And what lay before her in that cold, concrete room would unravel everything she believed about her marriage, her safety, and the life she thought she had built. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Dr. Michael Harrow was the kind of man people trusted without question. Tall, neatly dressed, with a voice that carried both authority and warmth, he had built his reputation in the small New Hampshire town over 2 decades. Patients spoke of him like a miracle worker, the kind of physician who remembered not just your medical history, but your children's names, your favorite restaurant, and even the last book you mentioned reading. Elena Harrow had fallen for him quickly. She often told friends that Michael had rescued her, from a chaotic past, from loneliness, from uncertainty about her future. In return, she devoted herself entirely to him, managing the home, organizing charity dinners in his honor, making sure his schedule was smooth and stress-free. On the outside, theirs was a marriage people envied. Inside their home, however, there were rules. Certain doors stayed locked, and Michael's explanation was always the same. "It's for your safety, Elena. Some things in the house just aren't safe for you to handle." At first, she accepted these boundaries without a second thought. After all, Michael was a doctor. He understood hazards better than she did. But over time, the rules became more rigid. The basement door was fitted with a heavy lock, and Michael kept the key on a small chain he wore under his shirt. He never left it lying around. If Elena asked about it, he would smile and brush it off, saying there were chemicals and tools down there that could hurt her. She wanted to believe him. Yet the more he repeated it, the more it felt like the lock was less about safety and more about secrecy. The first time her curiosity pushed her toward that door, she heard it, a faint metallic clink, followed by a sound that almost resembled breathing. When she mentioned it to Michael that evening, he chuckled, poured her a glass of wine, and told her she was imagining things. "Old houses make old noises," he said. "It's just the pipes." But the unease didn't fade. It grew, quietly, beneath the surface of their everyday life. It wasn't just the noises. Michael had developed a habit of leaving the house late at night under the pretense of making emergency visits. Elena never questioned it before. Emergencies were part of a doctor's life. But lately, he returned smelling faintly of bleach. When she asked about it, he claimed he'd had to clean up after a messy procedure. Then came the news that one of his patients had died unexpectedly during a routine treatment. The hospital review called it a tragic complication, nothing that could be proven as negligence. Still, the shadow it cast was undeniable. Elena tried to dismiss it, but a thought lingered like a weight on her chest. If Michael was capable of hiding parts of their home from her, what else was he capable of hiding? It was on a rainy Sunday afternoon when Elena went looking for a box of old photo albums in the attic. Michael was away on one of his overnight calls, and she thought the quiet would be a good chance to organize their memories. Pushing aside a stack of dusty cartons, she found a black nylon storage bag wedged behind a beam. It was heavier than she expected, and when she unzipped it, her breath caught. Inside were neatly folded clothes, a white dress shirt, dark slacks, and a lab coat, all with brownish-red stains that had long dried. Her first thought was an accident at work, perhaps during surgery. But the stains were thick, splattered in places, and the smell of iron was still faintly present, even after what looked like careful washing. By the time Michael returned that evening, she had rehearsed her question, holding the bag in her hands like evidence. He barely flinched. "Surgery accident," he said smoothly, his voice calm and unshaken. A patient hemorrhaged unexpectedly. I didn't want to throw these away until I made sure they could be cleaned. His explanation was practiced, too practiced. In the days that followed, Elena noticed other small oddities. Large envelopes began arriving at their home, delivered not by mail but slipped under the front door. She once opened one while Michael was showering and found it stuffed with cash, thick bundles of hundreds, unmarked, untraceable. She told herself it could be a payment for medical work outside the hospital, maybe charity or a private client. But the amounts were staggering, far beyond what a single patient would pay for treatment. When she asked Michael about it, he gave her a tired look and said, "Don't worry about things that don't concern you, Elena." It was meant to close the conversation, but it opened a new kind of fear inside her. Then came the news that rattled the neighborhood. A teenage girl from 2 houses down, the daughter of their neighbors, the Crawfords, vanished on her way home from school. Elena had seen her just the week before, laughing with friends in the driveway. Now, her photo was on every lamppost and the police were knocking on doors. When officers came to the Harrow residence, Michael greeted them warmly, almost too warmly. He joked with them, offered them coffee, and answered their questions without hesitation. He claimed he hadn't seen the girl in weeks. After a brief exchange, the officers left. Nothing stuck. That night, Elena woke to the smell of smoke. Looking out the bedroom window, she saw Michael in the backyard, the flames from their fire pit casting a flickering light across his face. Something long and dark was in the fire, fabric curling, edges blackening, breaking apart into glowing ash. He stood there silently, watching it burn, as if erasing it from existence. Elena didn't ask what it was. She didn't have to. Deep down, she already knew she had just witnessed something she would never be able to forget. By late spring, Elena's unease had shifted into something heavier, a constant gnawing awareness that the man she shared a bed with was no longer the man she thought she knew. Michael had grown more secretive, his absences more frequent, his excuses thinner. One rainy Thursday afternoon, unable to contain her suspicion any longer, Elena decided to follow him. She waited until he left in his black sedan, keeping her own car several lengths behind. He drove out of town to a part of the county she barely recognized, finally pulling into the cracked driveway of a rundown property hidden behind overgrown hedges. She stayed in her car until he went inside, then crept toward a side window. The glass was grimy, but through a gap she could see bright surgical lights, trays of gleaming instruments, and a large operating table in the center of the room. This was no clinic, no license on the wall, no reception area, no patients waiting. Just sterile equipment in a place that smelled faintly, even from outside, of chemicals and something rotten. Her heart pounded so loudly, she thought it might give her away. After that day, Michael's behavior shifted again, as though he sensed her eyes on him. His mood swings grew sharper. One moment, he'd be affectionate and smiling. The next, he'd accuse her of being careless with household bills or of taking too long on errands. He began checking her phone, just to make sure you're not getting those scam calls. But his eyes lingered too long on her messages. She noticed that sometimes, after she finished a conversation with a friend, that same friend would call back later, confused, saying Michael had phoned them to clarify what she'd said. The surveillance wasn't loud or obvious, but it was constant, like living under a microscope. When Elena tried to confide in her closest friend Rachel, she spoke in vague terms, careful not to say too much. But within a week, Rachel abruptly moved out of town, leaving only a short text saying she needed a fresh start. Elena doubted that was the whole truth. It was becoming clear that Michael could remove people from her life just as easily as he removed objects from their home. One night, unable to sleep, Elena went downstairs for a glass of water. Passing the basement door, she froze. There it was again, a sound she couldn't explain. It wasn't the groan of old pipes this time. It was muffled, rhythmic, and human. A low, strained voice, as if someone was calling out but didn't want to be heard. She pressed her ear against the wood, heart hammering. when suddenly the lock rattled. The door flew open just inches, and Michael stood there, his face a mask of cold fury. "Never go down there, Elena. Ever," he said, each word clipped and final. She nodded, too frightened to speak, and retreated upstairs. That was the night she stopped waiting for answers and began gathering them herself. Quietly, methodically, she started documenting everything. The unexplained cash envelopes, the late-night trips, the stains, the strange property. She hid a notebook inside a hollowed-out cookbook and began taking photos when Michael wasn't looking. The danger was real now, and if she was right about what was happening in that basement, she knew she might be the only one who could stop it. But she would have to survive long enough to prove it. Elena knew she couldn't rely on chance to uncover what Michael was hiding. She needed undeniable proof. One Saturday morning, while Michael left for what he claimed was a weekend medical conference 2 towns over, she retrieved a palm-sized camera she had ordered weeks earlier. Her hands trembled as she picked the lock on the basement door, the air inside heavy and damp, with a faint odor of disinfectant and something metallic beneath it. She placed the camera high in the corner, angled toward the far wall where she had once seen shadows shifting under the dim bulb. Every sound in the house seemed louder as she worked, but within minutes she was upstairs again, locking the door as if it had never been opened. That night she sat alone in the bedroom with her laptop, the feed streaming in grainy black and white. At first it was still, empty concrete, faint light. Then, from the corner, movement. Slowly, a figure emerged into view. It wasn't a shadow, or a mannequin, or a trick of the eye. It was a person. They were slumped against the wall, wrists bound with thick metal chains that connected to a bolt in the concrete. The figure's breathing was shallow, their head drooping forward as though every ounce of strength had drained from them. Elena's throat tightened as she realized she was staring at someone who was still alive, someone who had been hidden beneath her feet for who knew how long. Her instinct was to call the police immediately, but she stopped herself. If Michael had an explanation, any plausible story, he could twist it, deny it, erase it before help arrived. She needed more than just the image of a captive. She needed proof that would strip him of every defense, evidence that even his smooth lies couldn't undo. So, she played her part. Over the next 2 days, she smiled at him at breakfast, asked about his conference, and even packed his suitcase. Inside, she was memorizing every step of her plan. The real moment would come when he was gone long enough for the police to arrive without him interfering. The night before he left, Michael stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching her for a moment too long. "Whatever happens," he said slowly, "don't go downstairs. Promise me." She forced a small laugh and nodded, masking the fear twisting in her stomach. After he fell asleep, Elena checked the camera feed again. The captive was awake now, shifting weakly, but it wasn't just movement she saw this time. Michael was there, crouched beside them, speaking in low tones she couldn't hear. Then he pulled a syringe from his pocket and pressed it into the person's arm. The figure flinched, then slumped forward again. Elena clamped a hand over her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. She knew this was it, the final piece of proof she had been waiting for. But with every second that passed, the danger grew. Michael was leaving in the morning, and if her plan failed, she would be the next one in chains. The morning Michael left for his so-called conference, Elena waited until she heard the sound of his car fade completely into the distance. Her hands shook as she retrieved the hidden basement key she had stolen from his closet a week earlier. With the phone pressed to her ear, she gave the police dispatcher a short, urgent explanation and her address, then descended the stairs, each creak echoing in her chest. The moment she turned the key and opened the door, the smell hit her, antiseptic laced with something sour, human. The figure in the corner stirred at the sound, lifting their head just enough for Elena to see their face. It was the missing nurse from Michael's hospital, her eyes heavy-lidded, her skin pale. She tried to speak, but the words dissolved into a weak moan. Beside her lay an IV line leading to a bag of unmarked fluid. Elena crouched down, whispering that help was on the way, fighting to keep her own fear from spilling over. Within minutes, flashing lights painted the front of the Harrow home. Officers swept through the basement, confirming what Elena already knew. The nurse was alive but heavily drugged. Paramedics rushed her to safety while detectives took statements. But the basement was only the beginning. Acting on Elena's account of the rundown property Michael owned, police obtained a warrant and raided it that same afternoon. Inside, they found what no one in the quiet town could have imagined: surgical equipment stained with blood, medical records dating back over a decade, and chillingly detailed files on people who had vanished without a trace. The pattern was undeniable. Michael's off-the-books surgeries weren't medical favors or charity. They were part of an illegal organ trafficking network, and the scope of it stretched back more than 12 years. When the trial began, Elena took the stand, her voice steady despite the weight of her testimony. She told the court how she had married Michael at 19, believing she was stepping into a life of stability and purpose. She spoke about the rules in their home, the locked doors, the nights he disappeared, and the fear that had grown in the shadows of their marriage. But the most devastating moment came when prosecutors revealed medical records proving that years earlier, during what Michael had told her was a minor procedure after a car accident, he had removed one of her kidneys without her knowledge, selling it through the same network that had claimed so many others. The jury returned with their verdict in less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Dr. Michael Harrow was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Elena never attended the sentencing. Instead, she sold the house, closed her accounts, and left the city quietly. Neighbors said they never saw her again. Some believed she moved far away to start over. Others whispered that she simply disappeared, the weight of her years with Michael too heavy to carry into any new life. All that remained was the truth she had uncovered, and the reminder that even the most trusted face in the community can hide the darkest of crimes.